The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the immaculate lawns of the Summit Creek Estates as Karen Sterling, president of the Homeowners Association, stood on our driveway. She was not alone. Beside her, a man named Mark from the Sterling Point Management Company held a clipboard, his expression a practiced mask of professional indifference. They weren't looking at the house, the trim, or the state of the lawn, which was, of course, perfectly manicured to the HOA mandated height of 3¼ inches. Their collective focus was on a single, small tree. It was a Japanese maple, an Acer palmatum bloodgood, barely taller than I was. Its delicate, wine-red leaves trembled in the slight breeze, a splash of living color against the beige and gray palette of the neighborhood. We had planted it 2 months ago. Karen pointed a manicured finger at it, her voice devoid of emotion, which was somehow more menacing than if she had been shouting, "There it is," she said to Mark, who made a meticulous note on his form. Article 8, Section 4.2 of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching the inspection unfold on my own private property. My wife, Sarah, was at the window, her face a calm, analytical study. I had learned that look well over the years. It was the same one she wore when she was a forensic accountant, seconds away from uncovering a multi-million-dollar discrepancy hidden in a mountain of falsified ledgers. "Alex," Karen said, finally addressing me without turning her head. Her focus remained on the tree, as if it were a criminal in a lineup. "This tree obstructs the designated view corridor easement." Mark clicked his pen. "The CC&Rs are quite specific about unimpeded sightlines from lots designated as premium view lots," he added, his voice a monotone drone. Karen's lot, 3 houses up the hill, was one such lot. From her second-story deck, she enjoyed a panoramic vista of the distant foothills, a view she guarded with the ferocity of a dragon protecting its hoard. "We checked our property survey before we planted it." "Karen," I said, keeping my own voice level, "it's well within our lot line. The easement doesn't cross this section of our yard." Karen finally turned to face me, a thin, pitying smile on her lips. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and knew it. The board's interpretation of the governing documents is what matters here. "Alex, not yours. The view corridor is a conceptual boundary, and this tree, as it grows, will impede it." "It's 5 feet tall," I stated, the absurdity of the situation beginning to fray the edges of my composure. "And it will grow," she countered, her voice as crisp as a freshly printed violation notice. "We have to consider the future aesthetic harmony of the community. That's my fiduciary duty as president." Mark, the clipboard automaton, took a few photographs with his phone, his movements efficient and detached. He was documenting the evidence. This wasn't a neighborly chat. It was the formal, procedural beginning of a war. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was how it started. Not with a bang, but with a click of a pen and a citation from a binder. "You'll be receiving a notice," Karen said, turning to leave. She didn't wait for a response. There was no room for one. The verdict had already been rendered. Mark gave a curt, professional nod in my direction and followed her down the driveway. As they walked away, their synchronized steps echoing on the concrete, I looked back at the little Japanese maple, its leaves, so vibrant and full of life just moments before, now seemed fragile, a silent testament to the battle that had just been declared over its very existence. The sunlight glinted off the small, bronze plaque at its base, a detail Karen and Mark had conveniently ignored. It read, "In loving memory of Eleanor Grant. A life as beautiful as the gardens she tended. My mother." That evening, The dining room table was buried under a mountain of paper. The air, thick with the smell of fresh coffee, was tense with a quiet, focused energy. On one side of the table was our closing binder, nearly 3 inches thick, containing every document related to the purchase of our home. On the other was a crisp, new manila folder Sarah had labeled simply "The Tree." Sarah, her reading glasses perched on her nose, tapped a perfectly manicured nail on a large, folded document, our individual lot survey. "Here it is," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Lot 47. You can see the property lines, the utility easements along the back and side. There's no mention of a view corridor easement anywhere on this document." I leaned over, tracing the lines with my finger. That's what I told her. The survey is a legal document, recorded with the county. It defines the exact boundaries and encumbrances of our property, our private property. Exactly. Sarah agreed, her eyes scanning the page with an intensity that made me grateful she was on my side. Which means one of two things is happening. Either this view corridor easement is a fiction Karen invented to bully you, or it's a real easement established in the master plan of the entire development, which wouldn't necessarily appear on an individual lot survey from a title company. This was Sarah's world, while I designed buildings, focusing on form and function. Sarah had spent 15 years deconstructing financial systems, finding the single, misplaced number, or fraudulent entry that brought the whole house of cards down. She had retired early when her firm was acquired, but the forensic mindset never left her. She saw everything as a system of rules, and her singular talent was in understanding those rules better than the people who wrote them. "So, what do we do?" I asked, feeling a familiar wave of frustration. I was an architect. I dealt in blueprints, in concrete plans and zoning laws. The vague, subjective world of HOA politics felt like trying to build a house on quicksand. "We don't argue with Karen," Sarah said decisively, sitting back in her chair. "Arguing with people like her is pointless. They don't operate on logic. They operate on power. We fight her with procedure. We fight her with her own documents." She looked at the single page I held in my hand. The property survey. "This is helpful," she said. "But what we really need is the master plat map for the whole development. The one filed with the county recorder when Summit Creek was first established. And we need the original declaration of CC&Rs, not just the summarized version they give you at closing." I looked at the small Japanese maple through the dining room window, its silhouette dark against the twilight sky. It was the last thing I planted with Mom before she passed. I said quietly, "We picked it out together." She said the color reminded her of a sunset. Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her touch was warm, grounding. "I know," she said softly. "That's why we're not going to lose. This isn't about a tree anymore, Alex. It's about our home. And no one, especially not Karen Sterling, is going to take that from us." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a steely resolve. The battle lines were drawn, and our dining room table had just become the war room. The first step was to wait for Karen's opening salvo, the official notice. We knew it was coming. The only question was how draconian its demands would be. Exactly 4 days later, it arrived, not in our mailbox, but via a little green slip left by the mail carrier, informing us we had a piece of certified mail waiting for us at the post office. Certified mail was the HOA's preferred method of communication for official business. It was a power move, a way of saying, "This is serious. You cannot claim you didn't receive this." Driving to the post office, I felt a sense of dread. This small, bureaucratic errand felt like being summoned to the principal's office. I handed the clerk the green slip and my ID, and she returned with a stiff, white business envelope. The return address was for Sterling Point Management Company, acting on behalf of the Summit Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Back in the car, I carefully opened it. The letter was printed on heavy bond paper, embossed with the HOA's logo, a stylized mountain peak. The tone was coldly formal, a sterile template of legalese designed to intimidate. It was a formal notice of violation and demand for corrective action. The letter stated that on the date of the inspection, Lot 47 was found to be in violation of the community's governing documents. It then cited the specific clause, which someone had circled in blue ink, CC&R, Pro 8.4.2, View Corridors. The clause itself was a masterpiece of intentional ambiguity. No structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any lot which may damage or interfere with any easement for the installation or maintenance of utilities, or which may unreasonably change, obstruct, or retard direction or flow of any drainage channels, or which may be deemed by the Board of Directors to obstruct or diminish any view corridor as designated on the Community Master Plan, or as otherwise interpreted by the Board for the preservation of community aesthetic harmony and property values. The key phrase, Sarah would later point out, was or as otherwise interpreted by the Board. It was a blank check for subjective enforcement. The letter continued, demanding the offending planting 1-1, Acer palmatum bloodgood, be completely removed from the property within 14 days of the date of the notice. Failure to comply would result in the levying of monetary fines, starting at $100 plus an additional $25 for each day. The violation remained uncured. It also stated that the association reserved the right to enter the property, to cure the violation at the homeowner's expense, and to place a lien on our property for any unpaid fines and costs. The process had officially begun. The first shot had been fired, not with a shout, but with the crisp, rustling finality of a certified letter. The 14-day clock was ticking. My sentimental tribute to my mother had been officially designated an offending planting, a piece of natural contraband that had to be eliminated for the sake of community aesthetic harmony. The fight for our little tree, and for the principle of the matter, was on. My first instinct was that this could be solved with simple, direct communication, a rational conversation. Presenting our evidence would surely clear up the misunderstanding. That belief, I soon learned, was tragically naive. The first opportunity to plead my case was the monthly meeting of the Architectural Control Committee, or ACC, which Karen chaired. The meeting was held in the Summit Creek Clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and stale coffee. I arrived early, my property survey neatly rolled and secured with a rubber band, ready to present my case. The other two members of the ACC were Gerald, the board treasurer, and a retired insurance salesman, who nodded along to everything Karen said, and a woman named Brenda, who seemed perpetually distracted, scrolling through her phone. When the agenda finally turned to pending violations, Karen called my name. Mr. Grant, Lot 47, violation of CC&R 8.4.2, obstruction of a view corridor. I walked to the small lectern at the front of the room, feeling the eyes of the dozen or so other homeowners in attendance on me. I cleared my throat. Good evening. My name is Alex Grant. I received a violation notice regarding a Japanese maple tree we planted. I believe there has been a mistake, and I've brought our property survey to show why. I unrolled the survey on the table in front of Karen, pointing to our lot. As you can see, our property is clearly delineated. There are utility easements noted, but there is absolutely no mention of a view corridor easement encumbering this portion of our yard. Karen glanced at the document for less than a second, Her expression unchanged. She did not touch it. She looked past me. Addressing the room. The Architectural Control Committee is tasked with upholding the aesthetic standards of the community as outlined in the CC&Rs. The board has been granted the authority to interpret those standards for the benefit of all homeowners. But this is a legal document, I pressed, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. It's a survey recorded with the county. It literally defines our property rights. Gerald chimed in, his voice smooth and condescending. Son, the documents you sign when you buy a home in an HOA community like this one supersede certain individual preferences. You agreed to abide by the board's decisions when you closed on your house. I'm not talking about preferences, I said, my voice rising slightly. I'm talking about facts. The easement you're citing doesn't exist on my property. Karen finally looked directly at me, her eyes cold. Mr. Grant, your survey is irrelevant. The board has interpreted the placement of your tree as a future violation of the view corridor that benefits the entire community. The committee has already reviewed the matter based on the report from the management company. The violation stands. She tapped her pen on the agenda. Your appeal is denied. You have... She glanced at the letter in her file, 10 days remaining to cure the violation. Next item. I stood there, stunned. It was like presenting a mathematical proof to someone who insisted that 2 + 2 = 5, because they had passed a resolution saying so. My evidence, my logic, my adherence to the facts, none of it mattered. I had been stonewalled by a wall of pure, unadulterated bureaucracy. As I walked back to my seat, my survey rolled tightly in my fist. I felt a simmering anger. This wasn't about a tree, or a view, or community harmony. This was about power. Karen had refused to even look at my evidence because acknowledging it would mean admitting her authority had limits. And, in Karen Sterling's world, her authority had no limits. I had tried to fight on her turf, in her meeting, by her rules. It was a mistake I wouldn't make again. When I got home and told Sarah what happened, she just nodded slowly, a grim, determined look on her face. Okay, she said, pulling the tree folder toward her. Phase 1 was diplomacy. It failed. Phase 2 is discovery. Sarah's discovery phase transformed our home. The dining room table became a command center, covered in maps, binders, and color-coded sticky notes. Her methodical, forensic approach was a thing to behold. She began by formally requesting, via email to Sterling Point Management, a complete and unredacted copy of all board and ACC meeting minutes for the past 5 years, as was our right under the state's Property Owners Association Act. 2 weeks later, after a follow-up email citing the specific state statute, a thick manila envelope arrived. The minutes were inside, but they were a joke. Entire sections, particularly those under the heading Architectural Review and Covenant Enforcement, were thick black bars of redaction. The date range corresponding to the approval of several new backyard decks and patios on the premium view lots was almost entirely blacked out. It was a blatant attempt to conceal their decision-making process. They're hiding something, Sarah muttered, holding a page up to the light, as if she could somehow see through the black ink. What is the board so desperate to hide in those specific discussions? It was no longer just a suspicion. The redactions were a blinking red light, a clear sign of a cover-up. While we waited for the minutes, our investigation took us out of the neighborhood and into the city. We drove to the county recorder's office, a cavernous, quiet building that housed the legal history of every square inch of land in our county. The clerk, a kind, elderly woman, helped us locate the master plat map for the Summit Creek Estates development. It was an enormous, unwieldy document, a blueprint of the entire community drawn on thick, crinkling paper. We carefully unrolled it on a large viewing table. There, in precise, technical detail, was our neighborhood. Every lot, every street, every common area was laid out, and, most importantly, every single easement was marked with thin, dotted lines and labeled with a corresponding legal description. "Okay, Alex," Sarah said, handing me a magnifying glass. "You know how to read these better than I do. Find lot 47. It took a few minutes of tracing lines and cross-referencing street names, but I found it. Our property. I followed the boundaries, my finger tracing the familiar shape of our yard. And then I saw it. Or rather, I didn't. The dotted lines for the utility easements were exactly where our survey showed them. But there was no line, no notation, no mention of any view corridor easement crossing our property. It simply wasn't there. "It doesn't exist," I whispered, a feeling of vindication washing over me. "She made it up. Or, at the very least, she's completely misrepresenting it." "Hold on," Sarah said, her voice cautious. "Don't celebrate yet. Let's find the deed that legally established the easements." The clerk directed us to a dusty, leather-bound deed book from 1998, the year the developer, Summit Creek Properties, LLC, had filed the original declaration. We spent another hour poring over the dense, legalistic text until we found the section titled Declaration of Easements. It described every easement in the development, including the one Karen was citing. The text was clear. It granted a view corridor easement over a specific set of lots numbers, 1 through 12, the ones at the very top of the hill for the benefit of the lots directly behind them. Our lot. Number 47 was nowhere near that section. This was our smoking gun. The proof that Karen's entire case was built on a foundation of lies. But as we were about to pack up, feeling triumphant, I decided to consult a local expert. I remembered a neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired county surveyor who lived at the end of our cul-de-sac. He was a quiet, unassuming man who had once had his own run-in with Karen over the color he'd painted his mailbox, a shade of forest green she deemed inconsistent with the approved neutral palette. We met him that evening in his garage, which was a surveyor's museum, filled with old tripods, plumb bobs, and rolled-up maps. We laid out our findings on his workbench. He listened intently, peering at our copies of the plat map and deed through his bifocals. "Well, you're right," he confirmed, tapping a weathered finger on the map. "The easement for the view corridor is clear as day, and it's nowhere near your property. She's either ignorant of the facts or she's willfully misrepresenting them." He let out a dry chuckle. "With Karen, I'd bet on the latter." He then told us his story, how Karen had fined him monthly for his mailbox, until he'd spent $1,000 to have a lawyer send a cease and desist letter. The fines stopped, but he'd been on her blacklist ever since. On our way home, another neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was watering her petunias. She'd been in the community since it was built and had seen many HOA boards come and go. Seeing the documents in my hand, she gave us a sad, knowing smile. She had fought the board years ago over a satellite dish and lost, worn down by the endless letters and threats of fines. "Be careful. You too," she warned, her voice soft but heavy with experience. "You might have the facts on your side, but Karen has the power. She'll turn the neighborhood against you, and if you fight them with fire, you'll just burn the whole neighborhood down. Sometimes, it's easier to just pull up the tree." Her words, meant as a kind warning, solidified our resolve. This was bigger than our tree. It was about standing up to a bully who had been using fear and misinformation to control an entire community for far too long. We had the truth. Now. We just had to figure out how to use it. The breakthrough came late one Tuesday night. I had fallen asleep on the couch, but Sarah was still at the dining room table, a solitary lamp illuminating the sea of papers around her. She was fueled by coffee and an unyielding quest for the truth. I was woken by her sharp intake of breath. "Alex," she said, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "Alex, wake up. You need to see this." I stumbled over to the table, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Sarah had the master plat map spread out, held down at the corners by coffee mugs. Next to it, she had the unredacted pages from the original deed book describing the easements, with a red pen and a ruler. She had been meticulously transposing the exact legal description of the view corridor easement onto the plat map. "I was right," she said, her finger tracing the fresh red line she had drawn. "The easement doesn't cross our property. It misses us by a good 50 feet. "We already knew that," I said, still a bit groggy. "That's our proof." "No," she said, looking up at me, her eyes wide with the thrill of discovery. "That's not the story. This is—" She guided my finger along the red line she'd drawn, past our lot, up the gentle slope of the development's hill. The line continued, cutting directly across the backyard of another property, Lot 9. It sliced through the middle of a massive, newly built redwood deck, a sprawling, two-tiered structure with a built-in barbecue and fire pit that I knew for a fact had been the talk of the neighborhood. I looked at the corresponding homeowners list. Lot 9 belonged to Gerald, the HOA board treasurer and Karen's most loyal and vocal supporter. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The vague wording of the CC&Rs, Karen's refusal to look at our survey, the heavily redacted meeting minutes. It all made a sickening kind of sense. "His deck," I breathed, the pieces falling into place. "His deck is a massive, unapproved violation, sitting right in the middle of the actual view corridor." Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I'd bet my life on it. Karen isn't enforcing the rule to protect her view. She's selectively enforcing a misinterpretation of the rule against you to create a diversion. If she starts a big, public fight over your tiny tree, no one will think to look at the real, flagrant violation in her friend's backyard. She's protecting her ally." The motive was no longer just a petty abuse of power. It was active, deliberate corruption. Karen and Gerald were in it together. They were using the HOA's authority as both a shield and a sword. A shield to protect their own transgressions, and a sword to attack anyone who might, however inadvertently, draw attention to them. Our little Japanese maple, our tribute to my mother, was a convenient scapegoat. They had targeted us not because our tree was a threat to a view, but because our property was adjacent to the scene of their crime. A fight with us was a smokescreen. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the discovery settling over us. We now had more than just a defense against their bogus violation notice. We had evidence of malfeasance, of cronyism, of a breach of the very fiduciary duty Karen was so fond of citing. The game had changed entirely. We were no longer just defending our property. We were on the offensive, and we knew our battlefield could no longer be a closed-door committee meeting. It had to be public. It had to be a forum where the evidence could not be ignored, dismissed, or redacted. It had to be the annual homeowners meeting. Just as we began to strategize, to build our case for the annual meeting, the HOA escalated. A new letter arrived, this time from the law firm of Peters, Kane, and Associates, the official legal counsel for the Summit Creek Estates HOA. The envelope was thick and heavy, and its contents were designed to be the final, crushing blow. Inside was a formal notice of hearing and imposition of fines. It informed us that since we had failed to cure the violation within the allotted time frame, The board had officially voted to begin levying fines of $100, plus the $25 daily penalty. Retroactive to the deadline, our current balance was already $450. The letter stated that a formal hearing had been scheduled for us before the board in 3 weeks' time, where we would have an opportunity to present our case. But the tone of the letter made it clear that this hearing was a mere formality, a box to be checked on the way to a foregone conclusion. It included a chillingly dismissive line. The homeowners previously submitted materials. A non-certified property survey have been reviewed by the board and found to be insufficient to override the board's interpretation of the governing documents. But the most terrifying part was the final paragraph. It was printed in bold and underlined. Please be advised that should the violation remain uncured and the fines unpaid, the association will instruct legal counsel to commence with the filing of a lien against your property. All associated legal fees will be billed to your account. The intent to lien. It was the HOA's nuclear option. A lien on our property would destroy our credit, prevent us from ever selling or refinancing our home, and could, in the most extreme cases, even lead to foreclosure. They were threatening to take our home over a 5-foot tree. My hands trembled slightly as I held the letter, the legal letterhead, the professional jargon, the explicit financial and legal threats. It was a brutal, calculated act of intimidation. They were trying to scare us into submission, to make us believe that fighting back was not only futile, but financially catastrophic. And then I saw the date for the scheduled hearing. It was the week after the annual homeowners meeting. The trap was brilliant in its simple, procedural cruelty. The annual meeting, the one public forum where we could present our case to the entire community, was just 1 week away. Karen had timed this perfectly. She wanted to have the lien process officially underway before we ever had a chance to speak. She was trying to neutralize us, to discredit us as delinquent homeowners with outstanding fines before we could expose her and Gerald. By the time our formal hearing took place, the court of public opinion would have already been swayed, and the official record would show us as the ones in the wrong. The pressure was immense. We had all the evidence we needed, but a ticking clock and a legal sledgehammer hanging over our heads. The upcoming annual meeting was no longer just an opportunity. It was our only shot. We had 1 week to prepare for a 5-minute presentation that would either save our home or see us buried under an avalanche of fines, fees, and legal action. The stakes had been raised to their absolute limit. The clubhouse was packed for the annual meeting, the air thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and simmering suburban discontent. Most homeowners were there for the usual reasons to complain about the annual budget increase, or to hear the results of the board election. They had no idea they were about to witness a procedural coup. A large projector screen at the front of the room displayed the meeting agenda. Karen sat at the head table, flanked by the other board members, looking regal and in complete command. Gerald, the treasurer, was to her right, a smug little smile playing on his lips. Mark, the management company agent, sat at the end, his laptop open, ready to record the minutes. When the agenda reached the homeowner open forum, a large digital timer appeared on the screen. Set to 5:00, Karen announced, "Each homeowner will have 5 minutes to address the board. Please state your name and lot number for the record. We will begin with Mr. Grant, Lot 47. A murmur went through the room. Our dispute was common knowledge, a piece of neighborhood gossip. Karen's smirk was visible from the back row. She was expecting me to make an emotional, rambling plea about my mother's tree. She was ready to gavel me down for going over my time. She had no idea what was coming. I walked to the lectern, a USB drive in my hand. Sarah was in the front row, a small, encouraging smile on her face. I handed the drive to Mark. "I have a brief presentation," I said calmly. He looked to Karen, who gave a magnanimous wave of her hand, as if to say, "Let him have his little show." He inserted the drive, and the agenda on the screen was replaced by my first slide. Minute 1. The violation, 5:00 on the clock. Good evening. My name is Alex Grant, Lot 47. My voice was steady, amplified by the small microphone. The first slide was a high-resolution photo of the violation letter we had received, with CC&R, Paragraph 8.4.2, circled in red. As many of you know, I began. My wife and I received a violation notice for this Japanese maple tree, which the board claims is in violation of Section 8.4.2 concerning view corridors. I'd like to read the relevant portion of that rule aloud, which may be deemed by the Board of Directors to obstruct or diminish any view corridor as designated on the Community Master Plan. The key phrase here is "as designated on the Community Master Plan." The timer clicked to 4:00. Minute 2. The map, 3:59 on the clock. I advanced to the next slide. It was a crystal-clear image of the official Summit Creek Estates Master Plat map from the County Recorder's Office. Our lot, 47, was highlighted in yellow. This is the official Master Plat map for our community, the very document our CC&Rs refer to. I explained, using a laser pointer to trace the boundaries. As you can all see, the designated easements for utilities and drainage are clearly marked with dotted lines. There is no line, no marking, and no designation for a view corridor easement anywhere on or near my property. According to the foundational legal documents of this community, the violation we have been charged with is a legal and factual impossibility. A low hum of whispers began to spread through the room. Karen's smile tightened. Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The timer clicked to 3:00. Minute 3. The real violation, 2:59 on the clock. So, if the easement isn't on our property, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Where is it? Well, the original easement deeds, also on file with the county, are very specific. I clicked to the next slide. The slide showed an overhead satellite photograph of the neighborhood. Superimposed over it was a single, thick red line, precisely mapping the true location of the view corridor easement as defined in the deed. The line missed our property completely. Instead, it cut directly through the backyard of Lot 9, and, in the center of the image, bisected by the red line, was a huge, sprawling redwood deck. Gasps rippled through the audience. People were pointing, turning to their neighbors. The actual view corridor easement, I announced, my voice ringing with clarity, runs directly through the property of Board Treasurer Gerald, and his recently constructed deck is a clear and unambiguous violation of the very rule I am being fined for. The timer clicked to 2:00. Minute 4. The cover-up, 1:59 on the clock. At that moment, as I prepared to deliver the final blow, I glanced at the full, uncropped map on my laptop screen. My eyes caught a detail I hadn't focused on before a small notation on the property of Mr. Henderson, the retired surveyor who had helped us. His shed was 2 feet over the rear setback line, a minor, harmless infraction, but a violation nonetheless. Mrs. Gable's warning echoed in my mind. If you fight them with fire, you'll just burn the whole neighborhood down. I had a choice. I could show the entire map, exposing every minor infraction and turning neighbor against neighbor in a storm of recrimination. A scorched earth victory. Or I could be surgical. In a split-second decision, I used the presentation controls to zoom in, cropping the image so that it showed only Lot 9 and Gerald's deck in stark, undeniable detail. I chose justice, not vengeance. This raises a question, I said, clicking to the final, devastating slide. Why would the board pursue a baseless violation against my property while ignoring a flagrant one from one of their own? For the answer, we turned to the board's own meeting minutes. The final slide was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was a page from the redacted minutes we had received from the management company, showing solid black bars over the architectural review section. On the right was the same page, unredacted, which a former board member, appalled by Karen's tactics, had anonymously slipped into our mailbox just 2 days ago. I read from the unredacted text. Motion to approve deck construction at Lot 9. Motion fails for non-compliance with view corridor easement. The board knew. I declared, my voice rising with righteous anger. They knew Mr. Gerald's deck was a violation because they voted it down. And then, they buried it. They redacted the minutes to hide their corruption. And they targeted my family to create a diversion. This isn't about a tree. It's about a conspiracy to selectively enforce the rules to protect their friends while harassing and intimidating other homeowners. It is a profound and documented breach of their fiduciary duty. The timer on the screen read 0:58. I had finished with nearly a minute to spare. I set the laser pointer down on the lectern. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats before the room erupted. It wasn't just murmuring now. It was a wave of indignant shouting. People were on their feet, yelling questions at the board table, pointing at a pale and sputtering Gerald. Karen hammered her gavel on the table, her voice shrill and panicked. Order, order, Mr. Grant. Your time is up. This is not the proper forum for these accusations. But she had lost control. Her authority, built on a foundation of procedure and intimidation, had been shattered by irrefutable, documented evidence. A man in the back of the room, the same neighbor who had once been fined for the color of his truck, stood on a chair. I make a motion for a vote of no confidence in President Sterling and Treasurer Gerald, effective immediately. Seconded, roared a half-dozen voices at once. Karen's face was a blotchy, furious red. That is out of order. There is no such motion on the agenda. But it was too late. The homeowners were no longer listening to her. They were looking at the evidence still glowing on the projector screen. They were seeing years of petty fines, subjective rulings, and vague threats in a new light. It wasn't about maintaining standards. It was about maintaining control. Then, a new voice cut through the noise. It was Mark, the management company agent. He stood up, his professional mask having slipped into one of profound alarm. He was a representative of a licensed company, and he was now staring at a mountain of documented liability. On behalf of Sterling Point Management, he announced, his voice tight, I will be strongly recommending that the board table all pending violation notices and fines, pending a full, third-party audit of all enforcement actions from the past 24 months. He looked directly at me, then at the furious crowd. Furthermore, we will be recommending a special election to fill any board positions that may be vacated. That was it, the final, procedural nail in Karen's coffin. Her own management company, seeing the legal firestorm on the horizon, was abandoning her. Her power didn't just crack, it evaporated under the fluorescent lights of the clubhouse. Gerald was already gathering his papers, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Karen sat frozen, her gavel held limply in her hand, staring at the screen where the proof of her corruption was displayed for all to see. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of utter, hollow defeat. The procedural war she had started had ended with her own procedural annihilation. In the weeks that followed, the Summit Creek Estates HOA underwent a revolution. A special election was held, and an entirely new 5-member board was voted in. They were regular homeowners, a teacher, an engineer, a retired nurse who ran on a simple platform of transparency and fair, consistent enforcement. They asked me to run, but I politely declined. Sarah and I had never wanted power. We just wanted justice. We were content to be watchdogs. Our violation notice was formally rescinded, and the fines were expunged. Gerald quietly sold his house and moved away before the new board could compel him to tear down his illegal deck. Karen Sterling resigned in disgrace and became a recluse, the subject of hushed neighborhood legend. At the first meeting of the new board, I proposed a bylaw that Sarah had drafted. It required all covenant enforcement actions from the initial courtesy notice to the final resolution to be logged in a public, searchable database on the community website. With homeowner names redacted for privacy, it would ensure that any pattern of selective enforcement would be immediately obvious to the entire community. The bylaw passed unanimously. Our victory was complete. It was not just personal. It was systemic. We had restored a sense of fairness to the community. The little Japanese maple, the catalyst for the entire ordeal, was safe. Its red leaves seemed to shine a little brighter now, a quiet monument to a battle fought and won. One evening, about a month later, Sarah was at the dining room table, reviewing the full, unredacted financial records we had finally obtained from the new board. She had a strange, wry smile on her face. "What is it?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She pointed to a line item in the expense ledger. It was a list of payments made to a company called A1 Quality Landscaping. "You know how Karen always had a preferred vendor she would recommend to people for curing their landscaping violations?" she asked. I nodded. She said they were the only ones who knew the community's aesthetic code. "Well," Sarah said, tapping the screen of her laptop, where she had pulled up the state's business registration database. "I did a little digging. A1 Quality Landscaping is a sole proprietorship. The owner is a man named David Miller." She paused for dramatic effect. "His wife's maiden name is Sterling. He's Karen's brother-in-law." I stared at the screen, speechless. It was the final, sordid piece of the puzzle, the kickback scheme. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant obsessed with power. She was running a racket, manufacturing violations that her own family member would then be paid to cure. Our little tree was never just a tree. It was a potential invoice. We looked at each other, a slow smile spreading across my face. We forwarded the information to the new board president. What they did with it was up to them. For us, the war was truly over. Later that night, we stood on our porch, looking out at the quiet, peaceful street. The air was calm. The neighbors, no longer living under a cloud of arbitrary rules and constant fear, were out walking their dogs, talking to each other over their fences. There was a lightness, a sense of community that hadn't existed before. Our Japanese maple, its branches reaching for the twilight sky, stood as a silent guardian. We hadn't just protected our home. We had, in a small but meaningful way, helped restore the soul of our neighborhood. And that was a victory greater than we could have ever imagined.